We're good. It's 7, so we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to another Current Conversations. We are very excited to be talking tonight with New York State Assemblywoman Sandy Galef. Her district includes Philipstown. She has been in the Assembly since 1992. Some of us who are new to the Highlands will get to know her for the first time tonight, and others will get to know her a little bit better. There's a lot to cover tonight, so if anybody has questions, you can send them using the Q&A button that's somewhere along the bottom of your screen. And yeah, we're gonna get started. If you wanna go ahead. Are you muted? You are muted. I'm unmuting you. There we go.
Oh, am I here? You hear me now?
Yes, all good.
Okay. I'm Chip Rowe. I'm the editor of the Highlands Current. Thank you, Sandy, for being with us here. I have a long list of questions. I think it's interesting for people who aren't aware of your background. You are let me see if I can get this straight. You're from La Crosse, Wisconsin. You went to Purdue University. I went to Northwestern, so we're natural rivals there. You also went to University of Virginia. You were a school teacher in Scarsdale for a while. You were on the Westchester County Legislature for 13 years before you were elected to the Assembly in 1992, which is coming up. If you are reelected, you will then be into your 30th year in the Assembly, right? 92 to 2022. Is that right?
Yes, I kind of don't count the years. I never knew, actually, Chip, that I was going to go into government. I thought I was going to be an educator, and somehow I got diverted. But I'm still in the whole process of education through my town meetings, newsletters, and all of those things. So I feel like I've used those skills, but just in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. Your district, I was surprised to learn, speaking to you, that your district doesn't just include Philipstown, because we, of course, are focused on Philipstown. But you have quite a wide district. It goes to Ossining, it goes into Westchester, Peekskill, Kent. So you do represent other places. That was surprising. But of course, we are #1. You don't have to acknowledge that, but we know that.
I love Philipstown. You have more events going on than I think any other place.
Tell me about it.
I miss them. I must say, I miss them right now.
The calendar is popping up. It's good to see the calendar starting to revive a little bit with more people having outdoor concerts and that kind of thing. But let me start. You know, we had talked prior, had a really interesting conversation about Indian Point, because I think, you know, I live within the emergency evacuation, the 10-mile radius. And so I think about that the last 15 years I've lived in Philipstown. And people seem to focus on, you know, the catastrophe aspect of it. Like if something ever happened, it would be a huge catastrophe where there's so much population density around it. But I don't think a lot of people thought beyond that. You know, what happens to the workers? What happens to all the tax money that Entergy is paying to Buchanan and Hendrick Hudson School District and all this? And so I think it was interesting when they decided to shut it down. Immediately, there were meetings in this task force, which you're on, to kind of look at those issues. And you have 3 bills signed both by the Assembly and the Senate that are sitting on Governor Cuomo's desk, unsigned, which I think, or maybe is it 4 or 3? 3 that I wrote down.
Well, there are 3 at the moment. We have another bill that we've introduced that hasn't yet passed the Assembly, to have a decommissioning oversight board.
Oh, okay.
And that's for the next round.
Yeah, so these were the 3 bills briefly were to classify the spent fuel at Indian Point as real property, which we can define and talk about, to require the company that's decommissioning the plant, which isn't going to be Entergy, but another company, to hire, to put priority on hiring Indian Point employees, and to require Indian Point to keep paying this lump sum. They don't pay taxes, but they pay this lump sum in lieu of taxes. And this if or when Cuomo signs it, would make former power plants have to pay this lump sum. So I guess first question is, why doesn't Cuomo just sign these? Is there an issue that, is he reluctant? Does he have other plans? He sometimes does that. He'll say, well, I'm going to go talk to some people about this first. But is there an issue, or is it just that he's spacing the stuff out?
He does space it out. We pass, I don't know, it could be 500 to 1,000 bills during a session. And you wouldn't give all those bills to the governor right away, because if you did, the governor wouldn't have an opportunity really to evaluate them, determine whether he wants to sign them or not. So we kind of stretch it out. And usually we wait until the governor reaches out to the Assembly or the Senate and says, I'm interested in this bill, send it to me. When we get later in the year, in December, then we worry about our bills, because that's a potential when I get that phone call, and I usually get it either the day before New Year's, right at the end, saying, Sandy, and it's one of the counsels from the governor's office saying, we're vetoing this bill, that bill, and whatever. And then I argue with them, and it doesn't matter because that's what they're doing with it. So what happened last year with the bill that we have changed, and I've sponsored it with Senator Peter Harckham, about making sure that the employees, once they are employees of it, whether it's going to be Holtec that takes over the decommissioning or some other company, that company hires the people that have been working at Indian Point, as long as they have the talent, capability to do the job at the prevailing wage that they've been getting. We're very concerned about people. There are over 1,000 people that are employed at Indian Point. They have very good jobs there. And we just don't want them to lose their income, which has a relationship to the tax base in all of our communities. That many, many people that work at Indian Point live in our area. And, that's an economic strain for all of us, including their families, obviously. So last year, the governor didn't seem to do anything with that bill. And it was in January, I guess you might call it a pocket veto. We were negotiating, trying to change it, make it better or more palatable to him. And then nothing happened. So we reintroduced it with what we thought was an agreement that we had in January. And the unions have supported it. We hope the governor, will sign it at some point. The other that you mentioned, the spent fuel rods, is a very interesting thing. We're actually not taxing, we're not in the bill requiring the fuel rods to be taxed, but the containers for the fuel rods. And the container for the fuel rods that are in a pool, because the fuel rods, we learned, they are owned by the federal government.
Oh, sure.
Because they're supposed to find a place for them, so they own them. We don't. So we want to tax the others just to help the community who's losing, over $30 million. With the loss of revenues for schools and fire departments and libraries and Buchanan and Cortland and Westchester. You don't lose any property tax from that living in Putnam County, but there is a huge impact, particularly on the school district.
So when, as the devil's advocate, could you argue, or do you get pushback, like you are trying to tax a company that's going to sell? It's a nuclear power plant given, but, right. And there's certainly long-term effects of them leaving that stuff there, but energy can't get rid of it. They can't, these bills are going to keep them tied and paying for that for the indefinite future, because it will take 20 years, right? What are they, 15 to 20 years to decommission it? Entergy
does not like this bill. They don't usually like any of the bills that I introduce that talk about energy and nuclear plants. And but once they sell the plant, they are going to probably sell the plant. They'd have to pay for the fuel rods now once the plant closes. Now, this Indian Point 1 has been closed for many, many years. Indian Point 2 closed last April. Indian Point 3 is going to close this April. So once that closes, then we would start, if the bill gets signed by the governor, we'd start to tax and that would go, you get taxed, but you don't pay until another year goes by. So if they sell it, if Entergy sells the nuclear plants to Holtec, which is what they're trying to do, and they're before the NRC on this, they would, at that point, Holtec would be paying for the taxes on the property. And hopefully they would also be paying a pilot, and that's why we put the bill in to enable, I had legislation many years ago to establish a pilot for an active nuclear plant. Well, this is not going to be an active nuclear plant. So this is stage 2 on this whole issue. And so we're just saying, for the community, you still can have a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes on the plant. So, the community doesn't lose all of their money. They're going to lose a lot, but not all of it.
Well, and there's still some risk, I guess, with those spent fuel rods there, with the groundwater, the pipeline that goes right underneath them, this kind of thing. So I guess I was confused when we spoke earlier. The pocket veto, if he doesn't sign it and he doesn't veto it, isn't that technically after 30 days it's supposed to become the law? Is that not how it works?
Oh, it doesn't quite work that way. We have rules and regulations about, yes, he's got to sign it within 30 days. But to tell you the truth, if you push him, he'll say no. So you don't get any place. So it's better just to hopefully that it will happen. And we have sent up, there are a lot of petitions that were signed within the Buchanan-Cortland community to support these bills. So we have sent those up to him so that, there's thousands of people who've signed petitions. Will that matter? I don't know. But he certainly is interested in this issue because the governor was the one that put together the Closing Indian Point Task Force, which you mentioned I served on. And it's run by the Public Service Commission. With all of the different entities that are involved in the economic development, the labor, education, all of the commissioners and staff people come down from Albany to these meetings. So the governor is totally involved in it. Well, of course, he was one that was pressuring to close it too.
Yeah, it's just, that's what made me puzzled a little bit, but why these bills are, when I'm going through for the paper, what bill, how you voted on different bills that he signed and acted into law, and these are still sitting there, those 3, and they've been there for months, and you're kind of thinking, he was the guy who kind of pushed to get it closed. So you'd think that this would be on the top of his desk. But let's move on to, I know you're a member of the Election Law Committee with the Assembly, and I'd like to know, what you're envisioning for Election Day, because we're not going to see the results, not just at the presidential level, but there's so many absentee ballots out there that are going to come in. Even the local level, you wonder on some of these contested races, Sue Serino and Karen Smythe will be really close, and as it was last time. And so it's going to be a week. It's going to be 2 weeks. I mean, what do you expect is going to happen? Is it going to be a huge mess? I mean, that's my suspicion, that there's going to be a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety.
I think there will be a lot of anxiety because we're very used to, in most instances, having election day. As people involved in elections, they go someplace, find out what the tallies are, and they have a party or they don't have a party. And that's usually what happens. And we're so used to knowing on election day, most of those. Now, the last time with the Senate race in your area, there had to be a lot of counting and so on. So that wasn't determined for a while. Probably this time it'll be longer because there are more people that are doing absentee ballots. And I don't blame people for doing an absentee ballot. Because they may not, we don't want people not to vote. So the best thing to do is, if you're okay going on election day, I would say that's the first thing. You should do that if you're okay with that, and really physically vote. If you're not, go early voting. because then you won't have probably as many crowds. Although for you in Philipstown, it's really hard. I wish Putnam County had allowed you to have two different early voting places, not just one at the Putnam County Board of Elections, but there should have been one. But that was a decision that was made by Putnam. So you have to go a little distance to do early voting. And the other is to do your mail-in. Let me tell you what I've done. I decided I've gotten an absentee ballot, or I will be getting an absentee ballot. And I'm going to see what the lay of the land is. And it may be that I will fill out my absentee ballot and take it to a drop box at one of the polling sites. And I can do that with early voting. I can do it on election day. If I decide I don't want to vote by absentee ballot, I'll tear it up and I'll go physically and vote. I just don't know at this point what's going on in our lives. So I want an option. Maybe that isn't such a good thing to do. It's making the Board of Elections work harder because, you know, they got to send out an absentee ballot. But I don't want to be caught. Obviously, I'm on the ballot. I don't want to be caught. And it's a presidential year. Everybody wants to vote.
Sure.
So.
I just wrote about this today, actually. New York, it's not illegal to vote twice.
No, you can't vote twice.
You can send your absentee ballot in.
Oh.
And then
yes.
you can show up and vote at the poll, and then they'll pull your absentee ballot
yes.
and validate it. So you don't need to rip it up. You can just, put it in. Kathy Croft at Putnam County Board of Elections said they had 22 people who did that in the primary, who sent their absentee then showed up. You talk about.
It's really strange because I didn't know that about New York State because I don't think many of us were really dealing with absentee ballots. We'd rather just go to the polls and vote. And I hadn't realized that one could do that. But that's why we don't count absentee ballots ahead of time. We have to wait until we voted on the machines first before they're ever counted, and then they can do the cross check.
It's still illegal in New York to vote twice, in that if you go and vote early voting, and then you wouldn't be able to do it because they would stop you at the poll, I'm sure, polling place. But if you voted early voting and then show up on election day and try to vote again, that's illegal. It's intentional trying to vote twice. But I thought that was interesting that it in a way, it's good because it does allow people, if they change their plans or something, they feel more comfortable, they can always go, or they can find out if they do have it online now that you can go and see where your ballot is. But I want to talk about.
I think we're the only state that does it, and I'm not sure that won't be changed.
Yeah. The early voting thing is interesting because I have heard many people, and we've had some letters to the editor about that, the fact that there's only one early voting polling site in Carmel. I looked up the law. It's something maybe that might interest you because the law is if it's 99,000 or fewer registered voters in a county, they only have to have one.
Right.
But the next clause says that they're supposed to consider geography, travel time, all these other things they're supposed to consider, which is optional. So if the Board of Elections in Putnam doesn't feel like the 10,000 people, I mean, we are only 1/10 of the county population-wise on this side, but I wonder if that's something that the legislature should look at as early voting becomes more and more popular, to make the requirement based on the number of voters, and to have a geography requirement. Like you have to have early voting within 20 miles of every person or something, where it's based on for every 10,000 registered voters, there has to be, instead of this, like, they have these huge numbers, like 100,000 or less, 100 to 400,000, and you look at some of most counties, half the counties in the state are smaller than Putnam. We're in the middle. So what are they doing where you go up state and they got, they got 20,000 registered voters and people really have to drive. So I don't know, that seems like something the legislature may have to adjust because early voting is obviously here to stay and it's going to become more and more popular, I think, where people like.
And I think you will. Actually, Chip, we addressed that whole issue. It was up in, I think, Rensselaer County, and it wasn't Albany County, but next to it, that two counties only had one early voting site. we did get legislation passed. I don't know whether the governor signed it yet, to say that if there are 2 counties, you've got to have 1 in each county. So, we've come back. Early voting has only been in effect for about 1.5 years.
Oh, right.
And in November, last year was the first time we had it in the November election. And of course, we've had it, I guess, twice in the primaries. Maybe only once. Maybe only once.
No, I think you're right. It was last November last year, and then the primaries.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that just struck me though, because, obviously, and there's just a huge part of New York where the counties are going to have less than 100,000 registered voters because they have 100,000 or less people, so it's not,
Right.
So it just seemed off. Let's move on to legislative reform. I know that this is a longtime interest of yours, and we wrote about in 2016 when you introduced 15, I thought, common sense. I mean, they read as common sense, right? I don't live in Albany. I don't work in Albany. Maybe they're not, but I thought I'd share just a couple, because some people watching may not realize these don't exist yet. That one was a provision that would restrict campaign contributions from companies doing business with the state. One would prevent legislators from giving public money to businesses and nonprofit organizations in which a family member is associated. The one that I know is one of your colleagues' favorites, it would prohibit fundraisers in Albany County during the legislative session.
That goes over really
well, I'm sure. And requiring forfeiture of pension and retirement benefits from elected officials who are convicted of felonies. So
we did do that with a constitutional. We did do that one with a constitutional.
Okay. I was going to ask. That was my question. So, of those 15, have any of them become law? Have you had any success?
No, I have not had success. Getting when you're dealing with legislative reform, ethics reform, it is really very, very difficult. There have been some policy issues, I must say, that either the Assembly or the Senate has. The Assembly looks very carefully when we as elected officials are working for a grant for an organization that in no way do we have any family member on the board, whatever. We do that in the Assembly now, which is really good. It's just not state law, and I'd like it to be state law. There's another one that I think is really important. You might hire people to run your campaign. They work on your campaign in November. Then they come up to Albany in January, and they lobby on different issues. So, to me, that's such a conflict of interest if they're lobbying you. My bill says, don't lobby me, go lobby somebody else. You've helped me win my campaign. Don't come to me and say, I need a bill for whoever, is my contract. Mm-hmm. And, that seems to be such an easy one. Just to have that wall in between people. I have another one for you that was in my list, which kind of deals a little bit with Putnam County. I actually just got a letter delivered to me unsigned from Putnam, and it was about the Board of Elections. And, I strongly believe that the commissioners of the Board of Elections, and you have a Democrat and Republican, right, neither one of them should be the chair of the party, the Democratic or Republican Party.
The Republican commissioner is the chair of the
right. And this happens everywhere. It happens in Westchester. It happens all over the state. And my feeling is you have a potential conflict because somebody wants to be on the ballot, but if they're not chosen by the party, is there a conflict with the person at the Board of Elections when they're looking over petitions, making decisions about whether you can be on the ballot and so on? And it doesn't mean, we have a lot of other good people that can do these jobs. And I just think that shouldn't happen. For the first time ever, the Democrat in Westchester County, who is both the chair of the Westchester County Democratic Party, chair of the Mount Vernon Party, and Board of Elections Democratic Commissioner, has decided to give up his Westchester Democratic leader position.
Yeah,
right. But that happened after many, many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that one, I thought was one of those things where I read it and I was surprised that it was allowed. You just think it is a conflict. And the commissioners are pretty busy too. You wonder, how much time do you have in your day to do that? But yeah, that was another one. I mean, I think, I guess my thought was like with Sheldon Silver gone, or did the mood change at all since you've introduced these in the last 4 years where you're getting more positive feedback? Or do you think this is just like, so that no legislature really, it's not in their best interests in a way? I mean,
It
to get
really,
enough of them to vote for
when
it.
you look at ethics and legislative reform and election reform, it all is against what people are doing today, and they're there. And I found this always with election reform. Everybody has gotten elected with the rules that are there. They don't really necessarily want to change them. So, I find it very hard. But I have to say, since Shelley Silver has not been the Speaker of the Assembly and Carl Hastie has, there is a whole different atmosphere. Very engaged with all legislators in the Democratic Conference in Albany. And we've been Zooming conferences, by the way, because we can't do it any other way. We've actually been Zooming our legislative sessions too. I debated the Indian Point bills on Zoom, which was fascinating. Yes.
Yeah, good. One of the proposed reforms was a term limit on the Assembly Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader and a few other things. What's your view on a term limit for Assembly or Senate members? I mean, should there be? I mean, you've been 15 terms. I mean, should it be 10? Should it be 5 terms, or I don't know what the number would be? Or is there an argument to be made that there should be more turnover in the Assembly and Senate?
Well, you could argue that there's been a lot of turnover in the Assembly. If you start to look, yes, I've been there a long time, but the majority of people are very, very new, and many stay for 2 years or 4 years, and they're off running for New York City Council. They're running, in their own communities for county executive or whatever, or Congress. So when you start to look at it now, there's a lot of change. Maybe back a long time ago there wasn't, but there is a lot of change. I started out with the League of Women Voters, and it was all about everybody has to evaluate the people that are running for office and make a decision as to whether they should continue or not. And I'm very worried. I remember talking to somebody in the state of Arizona who was really, she was the leader on term limits in Arizona, and changed her mind because she said what happened. Everybody was in and out in 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. And what happened is the staff was running everything. There was no knowledge. There was no institutional knowledge at all about what happened, what worked, what didn't work. That doesn't mean you don't change your views, but at least somebody having a sense of what has gone on. And frankly, I don't think the staff should be running and making the decisions for legislators. Mm-hmm. And, we talked about a lot of bills, but there are 10,000 bills in Albany. I mean, we have an incredible selection of bills. Now, I also have a bill to say, I don't know whether I have it in right now, but that you should limit the number of bills to like 100 or something like that are much more doable instead of, having a lot of bills.
Well, you make a lot of friends up there in Albany.
Right. So I've just come down on that. Every 2 years, people have to make a decision whether you've done a good job or not done a good job. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of people that run for office. We did put into effect public financing of campaigns, and I think that will help to get more people to be able to run. It's very hard to raise money. And I think with a match, doesn't mean that it's all public financing. You have to raise money, you get matched, and that will start up in a number of years. You can't do it when people already have a treasury, because that doesn't work. So it will be new people, and I can't remember. I think it starts out in 2022 for the Assembly and Senate. And that will be a way, and I've had actually a town meeting at the Desmond Fish Library on that a number of years ago. Common Cause was supporting it and so on. That public financing has really worked for New York City. Mm-hmm. it's helped move things around.
Let's discuss the storm response, because I know this was something you wrote a letter to the current about. And there was a lot of public officials, a lot of elected officials really got on the utilities, like they were slow response, lack, and I have to say, maybe my standards are lower, but it was a pretty big storm. I think Central Hudson said they lost 90 utility poles. They had 1,600 lines down. The power was out for most people for 1 or 2 days. And we've had storms before that have done that. I guess I was surprised by the response by the elected officials. And I wonder if some of that is just the utilities are really easy targets. Nobody likes them. And so the politicians kind of are not gonna praise them. We're gonna say, we gotta be quicker. It's gotta be 12 hours. And, but I wonder if you could address that. I mean, was there something different about the last tropical storm from previous ones where there was a lot of massive damage and people
Well,
power for a few days?
with Superstorm Sandy, unfortunately my name, there was a lot of outage, and there was a lot of, the utilities came back and said, this is what we need to do, and what we're finding is that in many instances, they didn't do what they said they were going to do. I have to tell you, Central Hudson did a very good job. And when I look at all the emails that came into me and all the complaints, the majority of them were from Con Ed and NYSEG. And Central Hudson, I was just on a Zoom yesterday, and what I learned from that is that Central Hudson was able to manage some of these out-of-state contractors that came in to help, and they do it in a much better way than Con Ed. With Con Ed, I went down the street. I was without power, went down the street, and you see, I think I must have seen about 8 trucks, and they were from Long Island up, and just sitting there, and they weren't being managed. And so obviously Con Ed has to come in and do a better job. But Central Hudson has a different approach to it. There are some areas that, pretty much inner cities that may have to look at underground, and that's not for everybody, certainly. And we got to do a lot of tree pruning, which I know has happened in Philipstown. I had a friend of mine kind of arrested on the tree clearing issue.
Not happy with that.
So yes, so we really are looking, they're all asking, I think at this point, for an increase in utility rates. They want to do more storm hardening. Many want to have not the wood poles, but some other poles that aren't going to break. So, we're going to review what happened, take into account what our constituents have sent to us, and figure out if new things need to be done. And maybe our utilities need a better goal as to when they hope to, at least a goal, how many days, and also to provide, again, Central Hudson was back online. I think the storm was on Tuesday, and I think the majority of people were back online, weren't they, Thursday?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Philipstown, a lot of people have generators, so that's one thing that does ease the pain in a lot of cases, because we're used to having the power go out when the trees come down. And I know you had mentioned in your letter, and there's discussion of should we be burying the stuff up here, but it just seems like the massive expense of that.
Right, you probably won't, but should the utilities have generators for cell phones so that you have cell phone coverage? One of the issues that came up in Putnam County was service stations. You couldn't get gas because they didn't have generators. Should we require, this is a cost, but should we require all of our service stations to have generators, because people need the gas. They're there to get gas for the generators, right?
Yeah.
And they can't get gas. That tends to be a problem. So we're going to look at all these different areas.
Odell floated that to the Putnam legislature, which seemed lukewarm to the idea of requiring generators. You'd think that as a business decision that, you know, if a gas station owner could afford it, because they were the only ones that were still open, the two guys who had generators, the only ones who kept making money. I have a question I'm going to ask you from somebody who's watching, but my final question is as a Universal Life Church minister myself, you have proposed this marriage in a day. And I was surprised, you know, the idea that somebody could go and be ordained by the state for one day to do a wedding. That's essentially what it is. Mm-hmm. It ties into gay marriage, you know, that issue of people wanting to get married by friends or whatever. And I was surprised in the poll you took of your constituents, maybe you were surprised as well, that you know, two-thirds didn't support the idea. Can you just tell me briefly, like, what's your thought and why this issue stuck with you and why you support this idea and introduced a legislature?
It all started when I went out to a wedding in California of a relative. And at that wedding, they had a universal life minister. And I thought, oh, I really like that. It was a family member. And I'd been to so many weddings where the person marrying the individuals didn't know them, didn't really say much. It wasn't really very emotional at all. Sure. And, you know, but they were, you know, a worthy member of the clergy. So I thought, oh, okay, so why don't we do those in New York? And I looked up the regulation, and it is not clear that if we have universal life ministers, and they come in other names, I'm also registered as a universal life minister. You just go up on the internet, you register, and then you marry somebody.
I'm also a Universal Life Church monk, a chip monk.
Okay. I don't know what that means for this.
I'm a monk, like a monk.
You can marry.
They have other things you can buy. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So you buy this thing and then you marry people. But the question in New York with our domestic relations law is it says you have to be a full-fledged religion. So what is a religion? Is a religion on the internet, and they claim that they have all these people like us that are members of this religion. And so it really bothered me. I was so nervous that people were going to get married by a universal life minister and they wouldn't be married. And I had somebody that called me from upstate New York, older couple, and they had gotten married by a universal minister, and the husband wanted a divorce, and he just said, we're not married. And that's what happened. Wow. And they had to have some attorneys. And then I had another example. Somebody in the city lost a condo when they got divorced because they weren't really married. So I was very concerned about divorce, death, adoption of children. And so what I tell people now is go to your town clerk, your town judge, get married, and then do your universal. So you can have both. You can have both. So I put the law and I looked, we saw that Massachusetts, what they do is allow you to marry for a day, a ceremony for a day. Maybe you pay $25 to do it, but it would have the stamp of approval of Massachusetts. This would have the stamp of approval from New York. I don't know why. It was funny. I asked that question. Maybe I need to talk about it more, you know, what it really means. Sometimes my questionnaires are pretty brief. And but it didn't come back very well. It didn't come back in my favor.
Yeah, I think it just probably spoke to you're speaking against tradition. You know, you have the weddings in a church with a minister, and
right.
And but yeah, you do think about that because so technically, if I recall my own wedding, the minister signs the thing, but then you have to go first get the license. So they give you the license, but then the minister also has to sign it, right? Or,
right.
Or a justice of the peace or something. So you need two signatures. That's kind of the issue, right? Because otherwise you just get a marriage license.
Right.
So it's confusing to begin with. And maybe there's a universal life church type lawyer thing. I could become a lawyer online and then help people that way. Maybe not.
Well, it was one state, I can't remember, I think it was Tennessee or West Virginia who tried to get rid of universal life ministers with their legislature, and there was such an uproar.
Yeah.
They didn't do it.
That's a good constituency. Well, let me ask you some questions that people have asked, because I do like to get my questions in first. It's unfair, but that's how it works. Somebody asked about the green light bill. You know, you supported that. This was the bill that allows people to get driver's licenses without the standard documentation that had been required. You supported it. Maybe just explain a little bit about your thought of, behind why your support for it.
Well, what I found, and I had a lot of people come to my office on this one, and I didn't support it in the beginning, and then I worked with the sponsor of the bill to be sure that everybody had to take, anybody that was going to drive had to take a driver's test, just like everybody else. And that got put in the bill, which was very important, because there are a lot of people out there driving, and they don't have a license, and they haven't taken a test. They may have come from another country. Maybe their symbols are different. You know, maybe their standards are different. And it was very important, I felt, to have people on the road that know how to drive. That doesn't mean all people know how to drive. I know that, but at least to start out. And so people were driving that, you know, were immigrants, and they're on the road. And I think for safety purposes, I was very supportive of that. I remember, though, coming when it was first introduced, I was at an event in Cold Spring or Garrison, and people were so objecting to that at that point. But then 5 years later, people had a different view, because I actually polled that one too a number of years ago, and people were supportive. And I think it was a safety issue, and as long as people were getting tested, that was really important.
Yeah, you think that's what changed the view of it, was more that people started thinking of it as, I do want people on, I don't care necessarily about your immigration status. At this point, I just want you to be able to, you know,
Drive right.
Before you turn right kind of thing, or?
I think we want everybody to drive right. I've got a bill now on if you drag race, you lose your car.
Oh, well, I don't like that. I do not support that bill.
You don't support that bill. Well, drag racing on the highways.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's
I
not
see it all the time, though. Anybody going faster than me is drag racing, in my view.
Oh.
Somebody asked about Airbnbs. Now, is this a local issue, the Airbnb, the issue of regulating these hotels? Is it a county issue? Is it a state issue?
You know, we have some bills in Albany for regulation and so on. A lot of it has come out of New York City. There's a huge interest in this, because a lot of people are finding in their big apartment buildings or co-ops or condos that there are apartments that are rented, you know, on a week's basis, and people are very upset with their neighbors. They seem to move around a lot. But it has become a local issue too, and I think actually, I believe in Philipstown they started to look at that. I don't know that it.
Yeah, Beacon has looked at it. Beacon basically made it legal. Philipstown, Cold Spring have looked at it, but it seems like that's the kind of thing it's going to be regulated locally. I don't know. I don't know if the state. I guess the counties kind of regulate the hotels, and so that's why I wondered if it's a state issue, except for maybe the fire code is certainly a state issue.
Right. Well, bed and breakfasts, I believe, always have been regulated locally. Some communities might have one, but you have to meet certain standards, neighbor standards, and all kinds of things.
Yeah. Oh, somebody asked, yeah, that's a good point. Can any member of the bar marry somebody if you're a lawyer? Or do you have to be a judge of the peace, or?
No, because in the law it says, now we a couple of years ago we passed a law to let the governor marry. Now the governor's a lawyer.
Yeah.
So, because we know he was a attorney general, right? And they work for a law firm. So no, we let them, and we have recently passed that the Assembly and Senate can marry. We've always had the mayor of a community or supervisor of a community are able to marry, or they can assign somebody. Many times supervisors will assign somebody within their town offices to marry. Who else can marry? I think it's really the judges. Judges, if you're a lawyer and you're a judge, you can also be a judge without being a lawyer, but judges can marry. And a lot
The
of
Life Church, you can't marry if you're a Universal Life Church, or you can, but there might be complications.
I just think it's iffy, and I wouldn't take a chance. Yes, I think you can do universal life, but I would legally do it. And I've told people, you know, even if you get married, you have your ceremony with Universal Life Minister, go back afterwards, you know, a week after, whatever, go to your town clerk and have it official.
Yeah.
Just in case. Just in case.
Universal Life Church should be sponsoring this current conversation. We're bringing them all these new recruits.
Right.
Here's a question, and you know, I'm not quite sure the issue. Maybe Darren can expand on this, but would you support legislation outlawing new aerial wire cable? Does that mean anything?
New area wire cable.
Aerial wire cable.
Yeah, is that for our utilities?
I don't know. I'll ask him if he could just comment some more to tell me the context. I'd be happy to pass that on. I guess I'll close with another question from your questionnaire. We've been going quite a bit. I really appreciate you staying with us here. This was the daylight savings time. This surprised me on your question. We had this conversation. Because the question you offered constituents was, should we change to standard time from daylight savings time? And 25% said change to standard time, 25, but daylight savings was 47 and no change was 25. So you've got most people wanting the status quo.
Right, right.
I had to think about it for a second. Like, standard time would basically be, we would never set the clocks. You would set them in March, whatever that is in March, right? Am I right on this? And that would stay the whole year.
And that would stay the whole year, yes. And there's actually a bill on it.
Wouldn't move it back in the spring forward.
It wouldn't be what we're in now with daylight savings time.
Right, okay. So people want to keep it. They like the switching it so you get these 8 o'clock sunsets. What's your personal feeling? Can you
Well, the reason I asked the question was, and the reason I ask a lot of questions are, they're questions raised by my constituents. You may not know this, but when you send me an email about different issues and so on, we actually read them and discuss them in the office. And then we pull out ideas for my questionnaire, and we're trying to get ready for the next time round. So if anybody's listening and you have an idea that you'd like to explore with us, I'll be glad to do that. But that's how we got into it. And we had a lot of discussions in the office. As a matter of fact, today, I think it was in the New York Times today, there was an article about safety in the hospitals and the fact that with the change of an hour, there are more problems with medical procedures. Now, this is a really interesting thing. Now, before that, I'd heard from automobile people saying that there are more accidents because people are off. You're off for an hour. You're sleepy. You're better off staying on the same schedule. I can't tell you where I am, Chip, on this, but I think we need to do more research. And if we are, you know, if there's really a negative impact, maybe we should think about it. I think one of the problems we have is our children going to school. I think we want light as long as we can early in the morning.
Yeah.
But we also have energy needs which change. I mean, you know, if you remember, we closed, when Jimmy Carter was president, we closed schools in February so we didn't have to use energy. I mean, so we do these things over time. There isn't a great discussion, I don't think, on a national level. I may be wrong on this,
yeah.
But I think it's intriguing. And obviously, my constituents like life as it is.
Yeah. Well, somebody pointed out this is kind of a federal issue, but there's this weird thing that New York, and again, it's so complicated, this issue. New York can change to standard time.
Yes.
Is that right? So
And some states, a couple of states have.
Right, but it can't do, it can adopt daylight savings time year round, but the feds have to approve that?
Right, right.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't I don't think we're getting any federal approval right now. All right. You know, you know, the other problem is if our individual states all had different times, that could be a problem for what? The stock market, everything, you know. It could be. It could be.
We should just leave it all alone. Well, let me ask, I'm gonna wrap this up, but I have a lot of questions here I'm not going to be able to get to, but how would people contact you if they do have ideas for the survey, they have ideas for bills? I know you hear from a lot of people with ideas for bills. They want to praise or protest. How do you prefer that people contact you?
I think just through my email site, you know, galef at assembly.ny.gov.
Okay.
And, or my phone number, 914-941-1111. And, you know, and if I need to talk with you further, I'll call you back. And sometimes we reach out and say, you know, do you have a phone number that I can call you back on?
Right.
Right. You know, right now our office is open. We always have somebody answering the phone, unless they're on another phone. But we're not in there every day. We're doing a lot of communication from our home as I'm sitting here in my home.
Sure.
Right.
Or were you, was the Assembly essential workers? Technically?
I don't think, well, maybe when we were voting, we were essential. All I can tell you is we have been very busy because of COVID. I mean, we've helped so many people with healthcare issues, business issues, but mostly unemployment. When it first started, our phone was ringing off the hook. We helped so many people that got trapped in not being able to use their computers, and they get knocked off, and you know, they just couldn't, they had something unique in their work background. And so we tried to really help people so much with that. It's calmed down now, but there were people for months who didn't get any unemployment insurance.
It seemed to have gotten it worked out, although it may have been just that initial rush, unexpected rush. But
well, the Labor Department had never had so many people.
Oh, right.
And they couldn't handle it.
They probably learned quite a bit from it, though, right?
Right.
Technology-wise and so forth. Well, thank you, Sandy. I really appreciate we went way over the allotted time. I'm sorry to keep you, but always interesting to kind of catch up on what's going on.
Right. Well, thank you all so much. And this is a great opportunity for me because, you know, with COVID, I can't have town hall meetings. I do a lot of Zooms on issues and with people and so on. So if you have a collection of people that want to do a Zoom with me, be glad to do that. And I did have one town meeting on Zoom on election law, and it worked very well.
Right. Last week or the week before, I think?
A couple of weeks ago, and we went on for 2.5 hours. I didn't plan that because there were so many questions. So we want to do that again. We just have to wait until November to be able to do that, and plan to do that.
All right. Well, thank you, Sandy, and I'll invite Teresa back to wrap it up for us.
There we are. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight and being so generous with your time. I really appreciate it. And for those who couldn't join, we're going to post the video tomorrow, so people can tune in on YouTube.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.